video starting. We're live.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Terry Eichel, and I'm the director for the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network, a faith-based environmental nonprofit in Connecticut. I would like to begin the evening by reading IREJN's land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Connecticut, Algonquin for land on the Tidal River, is the traditional home of the Mohegan, Pequot, and many other tribes. We are grateful for our Native people's care for their native home, and we will strive to preserve it for the next 7 generations. Thank you for joining us tonight. IREJN is also the Connecticut state affiliate for the national organization Interfaith Power and Light. And together with the Hartford Seminary, we are pleased to welcome you to the second webinar in our series, Many Faiths, One Creation. This particular webinar is also co-sponsored by California Interfaith Power and Light. We have a wonderful program for you tonight with 4 national leaders speaking from the Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, and Christian faith traditions regarding climate change and our collective moral responsibility to address it. Reverend Jim Antal, Sofia Gilani, Rabbi Warren Stone, and Hari Venkatachalam will be joined by Peterson Toscano, host of Citizens Climate Radio, as our moderator. So you are in for a treat. Again, we are glad that you are joining us on this lovely spring evening. I would like now to introduce Susan Schoenberger, the Director of Communications for the Hartford Seminary, for a few additional words of welcome.
Thank you, Terry. We are so delighted to be here hosting another important event with the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network. If you're not familiar with Hartford Seminary, we are a graduate school with a focus on interfaith dialogue and peace building, and we have a diverse and multi-faith faculty and student body. If you're interested in being in community with people you might not otherwise meet, and that is proven to be the best way to break down barriers, we are the place to do it. Please check out heartsem.edu for information about our programs and events. We're online now, of course, but we plan to be both online and face-to-face in the fall. I'd like to thank Terry for all her work in organizing this event, as you know, the second in our collaborative series. And I also want to thank Reverend Tom Carr and Lynn Fulkerson, who have been in on the planning for these programs from the beginning. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for this evening. Peterson Toscano, a member of the Religious Society of Friends, or Quakers, is a playwright, Bible scholar, and the host of Citizens Climate Radio. For almost 10 years, he lived in Hartford, Connecticut, right near us, and now lives in South Africa. Peterson, it's all yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Not only am I coming to you from South Africa, I'm actually coming to you from the future. It's Friday morning here in South Africa, and it looks like it's going to be a nice day. I've been up so long, it's time for me to shave again, actually. But I am so excited. It's been such a joy getting to know these panelists, and we have a very special evening for you. They are brilliant, and hearing them engage with each other has just been so stimulating and you're going to really love the conversation that they have with each other. And we're definitely going to want to bring you in at different points. In fact, we talked about it that we really want to get to know you. And, you know, it's a webinar and it's hard. We can't really see you, but we want to know about you. And so we're going to give you a chance in the chat feature to share a little bit about yourselves. So I live in Venkatachalam, South Africa, and I'm a Quaker. And I'm curious, and the panel's curious, where are you coming from today? And what is your faith tradition or faith traditions, if any? So please, in the chat, put in where you're zooming from. And if you're part of a faith tradition or multiple ones, please put that in the chat so we can get a sense of who's in the Zoom with us. All right, so Mary's there in Woodbridge. I believe this session is being recorded. Is that right, Terry?
Yes, it is.
That's great.
Oh, you got some Quakers representing.
Quakers in the house. Let's see, Quakers. Muslim. Oh gosh, they're going so fast I can't even read them.
Litchfield, down Birmingham, Alabama. Oh, look, Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. That's great.
Connecticut.
Virginia Beach, Episcopal.
Ezra's from New Jersey, Muslim. We've got Gretchen from the United Church of Christ.
Lynn Johnson. We all know Lynn.
We
From
know and
Berlin,
love.
Germany. All right. You're currently winning our prize for the farthest away.
Right.
Atlanta, Georgia, Hindu. That's wonderful. I have to say, I mean, as I was emailing folks and sending them out the link, oh, Imna Jamir, India. All right. That is so cool. I started making sure that I told everyone it was Eastern Standard Time, because I saw we had so many people from different countries. It was very exciting.
It's great seeing people's backgrounds too, their various faith backgrounds.
Scotland. Halil from Scotland is Muslim. Wonderful.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. It means a lot to us that you're here. A lot of people don't want to have a conversation about climate change, and that you're here means a lot. And our hope is that you'll walk away with some fresh ideas. We're going to have a nice discussion about morals and values, but also what we can do. And so with that, I have another question for you to tell us about in the chat. Why did you come? I mean, like, you could have done anything tonight. Why did you choose to sign up for this webinar and spend time with us? So we'd love to hear like what it is that you're looking for. And in fact, if you have some questions, we're happy to hear those as well up front. You can either put your answer in the chat. There's also a little option for Q&A. We will have a Q&A at the end. And so if you want to share your questions up front, it's kind of helpful for us to see what you're interested in. So please, in the chat, put why did you come? Why did you sign up for this? What are you looking for? And if you have any questions for the panelists, or you're just coming with questions, put them in the Q&A section. And if you don't know where to put your thing, just put it wherever you can find a spot to put it. So George and Dottie, they're seeking additional steps to take. Laura's looking for ways. Wait, I lost you, Laura.
Ways to positively get positively active in climate crisis and looking for allies. Ooh, Carrie says she doesn't feel she hears enough about climate change from within her faith community, even though she has lots of conversations in the general world. And that's true. The religious community has a very specific role to play in this, but are we playing it?
Asher's joining us from Harvard Divinity School and is deeply interested in this topic. Eric, as a fairly new believer, it seems like Christians have divorced themselves from caring for the land they live on and what it means to take care of the soil, food, and community.
Absolutely. Oh, Donna would like to be able to present information to kids in an outdoor setting, teaching climate crisis in a loving atmosphere.
Okay.
That went by fast.
And Mary would like to hear thoughts on specific roles that congregations are uniquely poised to make in the area of climate change. I love that, because the thing is, we are definitely going to we're part of the solution, and congregations have a special power that obviously an individual doesn't have. Well, this is really helpful to see why you are coming here, and you've come to the right place, because these panelists have experience, wisdom, insight, and fresh perspectives on the topic of climate change. And tonight we're talking about a planetary crisis. But we've already been living in a planetary crisis. I mean, we're in the crisis of climate change, of course, but we've been in the crisis of COVID. And it was a year ago, right, that our lives suddenly upended, that, like within a week, everything changed. And by the end of that week, we were going into lockdowns and all of that. It was a year ago when the pandemic was really beginning to get big in the news. I was trying to wrap my head and my heart and my spirit around it. And I like to learn from people who are wiser than me. And I connected with 8 different women I know and trust. And I just asked them about this. These were all women who were very concerned about climate change. And for people already concerned about climate change, here was another weight in our hearts, another weight on our shoulders, this weight of the coronavirus. So I asked them, I was like, you've been through eco grief, you've been living with that, and now there's this added weight. What do you want the world to know? And they just poured out their wisdom. It was very powerful. That was a year ago I had that conversation with them, and it's still very, very resonant. So I want to share with you a short video with these 8 women. It's a trailer for the Citizens Climate Radio episode that they were part of, Eco Grief in a Time of Climate Change Mourning.
I think about other moments of collective grief, like 9/11. There isn't this one moment with Corona, but still everyone has a story to tell.
A lot of the deep-seated questions that come to the fore with climate change around who gets to adapt and where the funds go and on what terms and what kind of future we want to build. Those are the same questions that coronavirus is forcing us to ask.
Women have a heavy burden in climate change in several ways, but then there's also a heavy burden that women face when it comes to coronavirus. Both climate change and coronavirus are suspected to be associated with violence, potentially domestic violence.
It's feeling that grief or the other feelings that come along with a loss, rage, deep sadness, despair. There are many feelings that come along with the realization that our systems are failing us and that we need to co-create new ways of being in the world together.
We've been looking at feelings as kind of this roadblock to get through or to, dust our hands off and say, I don't want to feel that, or feelings are somehow a weakness. And I think we're realizing that they're actually a gateway for deeper and more efficient activism.
We as a society need to get much better at facing grief.
But when I'm angry and when I'm in despair, there are a certain number of things that I do. And one is that I really have to knock it into my head that we're not alone. And that's why I think of everyone together as a source to offset that anger.
We are separated, but we're still so much connected. It's something that is keeping my spirit up under this terrible uncertainty.
So we've had a practice run, a big one, a planetary crisis. And so for the panel, here's your question, your first question. What were ways that you personally or your faith community were able to respond in this time of coronavirus to meet the needs of somebody else? And they may have been practical, physical, spiritual, emotional needs. And can you see any connection to this crisis and coronavirus and what we're learning from having to face this crisis? Panelists, you have 3 minutes each to share your thoughts on that question. Who would like to begin?
I'm glad to begin, Peterson. And first, I want to thank you for that terrific compilation of comments from your guests of your radio show. I'm guessing that only a small percentage of religious leaders have helped their congregations to realize that there is a connection between the grief we've experienced that's been caused by the coronavirus and the overwhelming grief that people have begun to recognize. Grief over losing the world into which we were born, losing it either now or in the very near future. So one of the opportunities of the pandemic is that it allows religious leaders to bring grief to the surface. That begins with grief over our COVID losses, and I hope it will expand to include our grief over how we and 7 generations of humans have begun to wreck the earth. Since 2006, I've done my best to urge clergy to make their houses of worship safe enough for people to express their grief over the loss of beauty, biodiversity, species, fresh water, ocean life, and the ecological balance we have destroyed. My hope is that as clergy allow grief to emerge, by sharing their grief, congregations will experience a kind of solidarity created by this past year of isolation. And if congregations can do that, then we can go forward and share honest, open grief about the Eden into which we were born and that we are now letting go. And if we can do that, we will discover what South Africans, I'm thinking of you, Peterson, what South Africans and others who have participated in truth and reconciliation conversations have come to know, that grief is a precondition of hope, and that the smoke of grief and the fire of love are inseparable.
It was beautiful, Jim. It reminded me of the many people in our world that are refugees now. We have it good in the Western world, and this whole pandemic really gave us a huge sense of loss. And it reminded me in my own life of living through a war when I lived in Jerusalem a number of years ago, and how I never forgot it. All of a sudden there wasn't food and you couldn't get around and you had to be worried about whether you're going to live or die. And in a way, it's analogous. It's the first global impact, which is what climate change will be like and is like for people that are out in the world experiencing it already. And if anything, we need a sense of community. I lost my brother-in-law during this COVID, and my sister was alone. It was a very, very rough time. And I found here I am a rabbi, and I'm turning, to others. Fortunately, our religious community has been helpful, a community of support, where there's prayer on community Zoom and bereavement support groups, and people can check in with each other. And there are ways to create that sense of community and support. People were invited to give classes on anything they knew anything about, from bioethics to bread baking, challah making, and emotional support groups, or time for teenagers to come together when they're not in school, or young people. It was also during this period that Black Lives Matter movement happened, and we were at what should we do about that? We decided to have a COVID vigil on the front of the congregation. We had hundreds of people socially distancing with signs. So even in a time of tragedy and crisis, we can come together as a community. And certainly this anticipates the climate change that is part of our world as well, which you outlined so beautifully, Jim.
Thanks, Warren, for that. Picking up of what you said, I live in Northern Virginia, and so there were lots of Black Lives Matter protests and demonstrations in Northern Virginia, in DC, and even down in Richmond. And I tried my best to really build community, even outside of my faith, with my friends that do different activism, and really donate to mutual aid funds that help people with their jail bonds, with food, with anything they got impacted by with COVID. And I think we all saw a rise of mutual aid funds and how it was able to help people within our community, outside of our community, and really get to where it matters. Because you're right, the crisis is so heavy on all of us. We have immigration, we have refugees, and it's tough when you think about everything compiling all on each other. And we're just trying to do the best that we can to uplift each other and make it a little less grief for each other, help out as much as we can, while still focusing on what is going on, not turning a blind eye just because it's hard. But yeah.
Thank you, Sophia. That was really great. I actually intentionally waited to speak last because I kind of wanted to hear everyone else's thoughts before I spoke. And what I really realized is that everybody had such similar experiences through this entire pandemic. And that's why events like this are so important. That's why interfaith work is so important, because we're all truly experiencing the same thing. We are living on one planet. We only have one planet. When a global pandemic occurs, it affects all of us. When global warming occurs, it affects all of us. So I appreciate hearing all of your words because they resonate in my experience. In the Hindu community that I work with, I'm part of Sadhana Coalition of Progressive Hindus. I think the two things that people come to us with are they seek knowledge and they seek solace. And we can provide those two things as people of faith because we are believed to have an understanding of spiritual and real world matters. So we can bring in people who know about environmentalism, who are public health advocates. We can be that resource for them. And we did that in Sadhana. We would have satsangs, these e-satsangs on Zoom just like this. And we would have doctors, psychologists, public health professionals coming in and discussing the pandemic. And we want to do the same thing when it comes to environmental matters, but also solace. People don't want to just hear information. They want to be comforted. They want to know that there is a tomorrow, that this isn't the end. People live in fear when there's a pandemic, and people live in fear with global warming too. So I think that's incumbent on us as religious folks to be able to provide those two things, information and solace. So I appreciate everyone for sharing your thoughts.
What I heard come up with most of what you all had to say was about the power of community and the importance of community and building community. Dr. Natasha DeJohnette, who was in that short film, she's a public health expert. She says all the time that one of the most important things we can do to address climate change and the coming impacts and the already existing impacts of climate change is to build community. And there's all these studies that show that communities that are close-knit and cohesive, if they're that way before an extreme weather event comes, more people survive and they bounce back, they bounce forward quicker because they've got this glue. And that, I think, is what's so thrilling, is that that's what faith communities, that's kind of what we do best, right? It's sort of like what we've been trained to do, it's what we long to do, what we have all sorts of committees to do, is that kind of community building. Now, the other thing that faith communities really bring to this conversation that's so critical is a sense of right and wrong, a sense of morals and values, and also a sense of the mystery of things. I mean, there are conundrums that need to be, that aren't simply right and wrong. There's all sorts of complications. And Warren, you've written some really powerful things, and I have this one quote that I would love for you to share with everyone, and just because it's just really powerful, and I think it will help begin to frame this conversation.
It's not enough to care about environmental issues as climate change, forest devastation, and environmental threats to clean water, air, and seas. Now let every religious institution become a true beacon to our communities, illustrating by our actions and example our spiritual commitment to our earth and its threatened and limited resources.
And Jim, you had a quote that you sent that was from someone you met when you were actually protesting. How did you meet this person? Share the story, please.
So the person is Gus Speth, and Time Magazine has described him as sort of Mr. Environmental. He was part of Jimmy Carter's White House, and then became part of the United Nations environmental program, and was one of the founders of two different environmental organizations. And he is, this is a quote that some of you in this, in our audience may have heard before. I have to say, Gus and I became very good friends when we were arrested together in 2011 protesting the Keystone XL pipeline. And he he can't remember exactly saying these words, but if you Google them, they're all over the place on the internet, and here they are. I used to think that if we threw enough good science at the environmental problems, we could solve them. I was wrong. The main threats to the environment are not biodiversity loss, pollution, and climate change, as I once thought. They are selfishness and greed and pride. And for that, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation.
Thank you. Last night, I had a great conversation with Hadi. This is the great thing about being the moderator. I get to connect with everyone. And I recorded the conversation for, because I just knew he was going to say something really interesting. And he said many things very interesting. And I couldn't share it all, but I put together a short film based on one thing that he said. It was just so powerful. And I think it really helps frame this discussion about, well, that so many people are coming with questions about, like, what do I do in this time, and where do I go? And so I'm going to just share this with you.
One of the values that I very much associated with was the concept of Svadharma. Svadharma means the dharma, or the responsibility that is associated with you and only you. It's not anyone else's dharma, but your own dharma. Every Svadharma, every person's dharma is unique, which means that when you do work like environmentalism, it might mean entirely different things to me as a lay individual going about doing my job every day versus someone who's a politician, right? Their Svadharma is a little bit different. What they can do, what they can accomplish, what their responsibility is to the environment is very different. I've always taken that concept of Svadharma very seriously. I have been given this path that I need to do certain work. What does that mean for me? Where am I going to apply myself? Where am I going to do that work in terms of environmentalism? Where am I going to do that work in terms of LGBTQ plus issues? And I'm never putting that expectation on someone else. That is my own dharma. That is my Svadharma. And I let each person figure out what their own Svadharma is. But I think we're all reaching for that same goal. And that's actually what we know in Hinduism as Rita, that there is a universal dharma, protecting our planet, doing good for the world, doing good for others. And each Svadharma is like kind of a river that flows towards that Rita, that entire dharma that our world is part of.
Well, thank you. That was a really great conversation we did have yesterday. I really enjoyed that conversation, and thank you for internalizing that concept of Svadharma. I do internalize that every day because I realize that we're all kind of put on this path, on this planet, with different powers, different abilities. And I think one of the privileges associated with being born in a Western nation like we are, being born, with the financial abilities, the resources that I have, it's incumbent on us to do that work of environmentalism, because not everybody can do that work. Like, we can say there's, billions of people on this planet, but not all billions of them have that ability to do that. So I appreciate everyone who uses the resources that are available to them to do the work that's necessary to help our planet.
Cool. I'm excited about this part of the discussion because I think this is where we get to some real meaty stuff. And the three of you just set it off very nicely with what you had to share. So here's your question, panel, to discuss with each other. What is a moral issue, a challenge or conundrum we face with climate change? And how does your faith tradition or spiritual practice or holy text speak to it? And I'm actually going to put that discussion question into the chat so that the folks watching can ponder it as they listen to you as well.
When I frequently speak, I start by blowing a shofar, that ram's horn, as if, and then it's speaking to me as if the earth is crying out to me. It almost is an animal sound, like the earth is crying out. And in ancient Hebrew tradition, the word Shema, listen. You have to listen. So I invite everyone here to listen to the earth crying out to us as if it's dying. My oceans, my waters, my forests, my air. Can you feel my suffering? Can you feel my change? This climate crisis will continue not only our generations, but all future generations. It's a deeply spiritual issue for all faith traditions. And each of us can take, as Hari said, each of us can try to take a leadership role. Who face the most dangers, the most vulnerable, the poor? You can witness environmental racism, the toxic dumps are in scary places, threatening health. Sofia, you mentioned refugees, and I mentioned refugees as well, another moral issue. And so for me as a rabbi, the ancient Hebrew tradition calls out, from the very beginning, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. The divine created all the heavens and the earth, and we were given the power to care for creation. In Jewish tradition, we have Shabbat as well as Christians and Muslim traditions, a day of not creating, not using up, not doing, but returning to the natural world, giving up technology, a day to breathe in air, water, sky, and walk gently on the earth. In ancient Hebrew tradition, we have the idea of the sabbatical of the earth, that even the earth needs to lay fallow, to have rights as well. And in our day and age, the poorest neighborhoods where I live, which is in Washington, D.C., everyone thinks of the Potomac River, but we're on two rivers. The Anacostia River is a river that hasn't been cleaned up, and it goes through the poorest part of town. You know, where is the environmental damage for people that can least able to handle it? There's a famous midrash, ancient folklore, that said, the divine speaks to the first human being, Adam, and says, look at how beautiful is all this creation. It's splendid. If you destroy it, who will take care of it after you? So our tradition is saying we need to be the moral voice, our faith communities, and we're in this together. All faith communities and humanistic communities together. So that shofar calls out, in a way, calling out, God's earth is calling to us. Help me, do something, I'm dying. May our religious communities and all communities do something to walk gently on this earth and do some healing too.
Well, I can build on what you've just said, Rabbi Warren. And as I do, though, I also want to hearken back, Hari, to this concept of Rita, of universal Dharma. I often speak about that this generation has a vocation, which is a word we use a lot in Christian circles. But most people think, oh no, vocation, it's about my personal vocation, my relationship with God. But like Rita, right, this generation has a vocation. And so with that in mind, and also as an illustration of what Rabbi Warren was saying, I just want to share with the audience very quickly 3 resolutions that my denomination passed over the past few years that speak to this exact issue. as illustrations of what would be your equivalent? I was a church leader, so I wrote these 3 resolutions. What would be your equivalent of that in your vocation as a lawyer, as a doctor, as a nurse, whatever it is? So the first one goes back to 2013, when the UCC National Synod became the first religious body and the first national body in America to vote to divest from fossil fuel companies. I was the author and the lead proponent of that resolution, and I can tell you that it was met with a great deal of resistance, largely because, as the quote that I read from Gus Speth, it signaled a spiritual and a cultural transformation that needed to address the climate emergency. So it got a great deal of national publicity, but no one imagined that less than 8 years later, portfolios worth $14.5 trillion would have purged their portfolios of their fossil fuel stock holdings. So then a few years later, on June 1st, 2017, I'm sure everybody listening to this remembers that date as when Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord. A few days later, I wrote another resolution for our upcoming national UCC gathering. And I titled that resolution, "The Earth is the Lord's. It's not ours to wreck. Imperatives for a new moral era." And so in addition to declaring our opposition to Trump's pullout from the Paris Climate Accord, the resolution called upon clergy to preach about our moral obligation to protect God's creation. It also called upon all UCC members to resist all expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure and to initiate a new American story that is not dependent on fossil fuel or on wealth for the few and misery for the many. And then finally, a few days after the Green New Deal was introduced by AOC and Senator Markey, I drafted a resolution for our upcoming national gathering entitled it, "Let Justice Roll Down," declaring support for the Green New Deal and affirming the intersectionality of climate justice with all justice issues. It passed with a 97% margin, and the UCC thereby became the first Christian denomination to endorse the Green New Deal. The resolution unpacks the intersectionality of all the justice issues that we have been talking about this evening and shows how climate change makes all of them worse. And finally, it urges our congregations to discuss the climate crisis and the urgent need for a just transition as part of our worship life and part of our community life. That's what I hope is the outcome of your participation in tonight's webinar, is that you find ways to convince your congregation to engage this issue as fully as that.
Thank you, Jim, for that, and thank you, Lauren. One of the problems, though, with the morals around this, some of it is pretty straightforward, but then there are also these conundrums. They're not simple situations to address. And I think that faith communities often and faith leaders can grapple with these because people are looking for directions. And I'm wondering about that. How do you've spoken about that before, about some of these conundrums?
Yeah. One of the things that we talk about in Hinduism in our holy texts is there's not always like a good guy and a bad guy. There's very complex figures in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. I think the Mahabharata is multiple times the combined length of the Iliad and the Odyssey. So we're talking about very complex characters that sometimes show heroic traits and sometimes show villainous traits, right? And I feel like that is a representation of society as a whole, right? Like people are very complex. People have very complex needs. So my family originates from South India, which is known for deep forests, a lot of jungles, a lot of rich, beautiful landscapes. But deforestation is a huge problem in a large part of where my family is originally from.
But when you go to talk to a lot of times these smugglers that smuggle teak trees from these jungles, or who cut down, protected, forests and jungles, a lot of times their goals and missions are very simple. I need this wood to feed my family. I need this to create fuel for my household. So I think sometimes we as faith communities, when the world likes to see things as black and white, as good and evil, I think it helped. We're in a position to bring parties together that might not often speak to each other, that might not see eye to eye, and say, you know what, I understand the different needs. There are things that you might want, there's things that you might need. But how can we all reach our goals? How can we all get to a place where we're all safe, we're all healthy, we have enough food to feed our children, but we can also help the environment? It doesn't need to be a conflict. And I think sometimes we see things as a conflict. And as religious leaders, we have the ability to dismantle conflict and build camaraderie. So I would like to see more of that.
I'll go with adding on with the conundrum. When I think about the environmental movement as a whole, to me, as a mid-20s, 20-year-old woman, the environmental movement to me started with, back in the day, with John Muir, and kind of like a history of white supremacy and eugenics that has kind of traveled along and made the environmental movement, when I was little, about saving the polar bears, saving the Amazon forest, very inanimate objects or nature-based conservation. And I'm really proud and happy to be part of a climate movement that's really focusing on people, and especially right now internationally. There's climate change is going to affect everybody. It's going to affect people that live off the Anacostia River, where DC is not funding enough to make sure that it's safe for them. It's going to impact, my mom's from Nicaragua. There is deforestation happening in Nicaragua, where indigenous land is getting taken. Indigenous land is being taken everywhere. My dad's from Pakistan. In Karachi last summer, there was really bad flooding, and so we have this issue with infrastructure, with land rights that isn't unique to any part of the world. Every part of this world is having challenges with indigenous sovereignty, with just caring about people. And a verse that speaks to me is Allah, who made you, the earth, a place of settlement, and the sky a ceiling, and formed you and perfected your forms and provided you with good things. That is Allah, your Lord, then blessed is Allah, Lord of the worlds. And to me, that's God creating this planet for us, creating everybody on this planet. And to not think about that in the environmental movement seems crazy to me, right? There's people everywhere, and we should be focusing on what is best for everyone. And while at your own congregation doing that is amazing, because then you can teach your friend, your neighbor, your family members that don't live where you are, and it can be a transformational change. And there's so much intersectionality within the climate movement. We're at it right now, the intersectionality of climate and religion, which doesn't really happen a lot. A lot of things are based on the economy, on conservation, and we need to add all those things together to be able to work on it cohesively and with our different perspectives and how we've experienced the climate movement.
I'm curious about the folks watching this right now, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to put in the chat conundrums that you think need to be addressed. I mean, not the simple ones, not the ones that are like clearly, yeah, we need to do this, but these challenges that aren't easy to resolve. What are these issues that are currently happening and that you foresee coming up that we need wise leaders and people of faith to kind of sit and work through and give opinions to policymakers about these conundrums? So those of you watching, feel free right now. We're going to be looking what you type in there. what are some moral issues, conundrums in particular, not easy to solve, those wicked problems that need to be looked at and really need faith leaders to have their eyeballs on it? Let's see what they have to say. Climate refugees has come up now a couple of times, and how do we care for them? And you know, climate refugees are already, you know, people are experiencing this in the US with wildfires. People have to go somewhere. When we're in Puerto Rico with the hurricanes, people had to move. And so hospitality is a big part of this.
I'd like to.
While we're talking about Puerto Rico, I also want to add how flights skyrocketed during that time. And so people that had money were able to escape. And so that's like the example of climate refugees, is that when a ticket that usually costs a couple $100 or less to go to Miami ends up being $700,000. That makes it hard for anybody to be able to do anything. You're stuck where you are. Sorry, Warren, you're saying something.
Oh, I thought your focus on people really matters. When I was in Copenhagen during the UN, I met with a delegation of the world's first environmental refugees. They were from the atolls of Micronesia in a group called the Kiribati. And the president came and he sent a whole delegation of 9 people. And they said, our children are dying. The salt salinized water has entered the soil and has killed all the fruit trees. And so we have to leave our islands, and we do not want to be known as environmental refugees. We want to keep our ancient Kiribati Micronesian culture, its music, its art, its history, its traditions alive. And they're beginning to send their teenagers to New Zealand and Australia to try to recolonize. But they want to maintain and be respected. And I think, you know, someone on the chat mentioned hospitality. You know, how can we open our arms to those that are wanderers crossing from one place to another, to give them a full respect? This is a huge, huge issue.
Yeah.
The combination of refugees and climate, and we'll all be impacted.
Yeah. Hari, Clarence in the chat put something in that we were talking about the other day. One conundrum is how we help people in developing countries to develop flourishing economies without relying on fossil fuels like we have in the West. That was a conundrum you were talking about the other day when we were chatting.
Yeah, I mean, that's building still off of what I was saying, that we have to address all the needs of people in hand with environmental justice. And I think environmental justice is actually a path towards fulfilling a lot of those needs. When you look at the green economy, when you look at environmentally safe options of energy sources to what's available, I think it actually benefits that the path of environmentalism will actually benefit a lot more people than hurt people. I was raised mostly in Pennsylvania, and so tons of coal towns around where I grew up. And a lot of people think of coal as, you know, money. It's what fuels the town's economy. It's what feeds, it's what brings, you know, bread to our plate, right? But it's also what killed tons of people. You know, lung cancer affected tons of people in our communities. And once the industry disappeared, it just impoverished a lot of people. And I believe that if the fear is losing out on money, if the fear is people starving, and the only way to get forward with environmentalism is for people to starve or suffer, then that's not the correct path. But there is a path, I believe, where we can achieve our goals and bring people to the table and address their needs as well. So I think we should be open to when people say, hey, I'm concerned about my country's economy. We should say, step up to the plate. Come, let us hear you out, and let us explain how our path, a path that helps all of us, will help everyone ultimately. I know that's kind of redundant, but helping all of us helps everyone.
And it's the perfect setup to the next part of our discussion, because I already feel it in the audience. Like, so what can we do? So how then shall we respond to all of this? What do we have in our faith communities, in our traditions? What do we have to bring to address some of these issues? And to help ground this, Warren has a slideshow he's going to show us that will kind of show some action already happening in the congregations there that he works with. Warren?
Okay, this will be my presentation, and I'll be silent afterwards. I don't want to overspeak, but I've been in a congregation for 3 decades, and the question for me is, how can you spiritually transform our lives in our congregations, our schools and seminaries to be sacred laboratories of the sacred possible for the earth? What can we do? And there are some things we can do. Number one, use our sanctuary for teaching, the sacred and the environmental. Playing with architecture, engaging people when they enter. Make it a green sanctuary. In our own community, we put up a solar eternal light and a solar roof and energy zones and recycled materials throughout the building. And then one of the first things we did was build an outdoor sanctuary on our grounds. We have about 6 acres. And then we use prayer, and everything will be illustrated in the video. Prayer, song, raps, chants, speakers to come into our community on all issues of water, energy, solar, and then be sure to engage all ages, preschool, elementary, middle, and high school students. Be creative. Help the students become passionate about loving nature and participating in the beauty of and fragility of this divine caretakers so they become divine caretakers of the planet. Reclaim outdoor space and gardens. There's no reason that any of our communities can't use that outdoor space. And you'll see in this video a meditative rock garden, an outdoor prayer space, a sculpture garden, a journey garden, a riverbed. And then aside from the community life, to move into regional eco zones. For example, no matter where you live, and people in this webinar are coming from all over the world, think of a farm close to you and take your families and children out to the farm to teach about social justice and nature. Have the adults go on sacred nature walks. We invited Congressman Jamie Raskin to a farm and an entire community to speak about justice and the environment, as an influence maker. We took our kids in the DC area to boats on the Chesapeake Bay so they could clean the bay and walk in the mud and feel what that was like to participate. Get involved with other religious leaders to share your voice. Bring your congregants, teens, to your capitals in DC and other capitals for those who are in other places in the world. And then support organizations like the Interfaith Power and Light, the Interreligious Environmental Justice Coalition, the Eco Justice Coalition, the National Religious Coalition on Creation Care. There's so many wonderful local organizations. Your radio show, Peterson. And then protest inside and outside the system. It's not enough to do it inside the systems. Sometimes you need to go outside. You'll see a picture of many ministers in front of the Environmental Protection Agency during the last administration, where we got on our knees and prayed and invited all the networks to say that we're not happy, that nothing's being done in the environment. Each of you can be empowered. Because you're part of our spiritual community, start a blog, get it out. I discovered when I came back from Kyoto, I said, we're going to pass this thing. But it's an asymmetrical battle. The oil and gas and coal companies have a lot of money and lobbyists. We don't. But we can write an article, as Jim did so beautifully, and all of you have done. Write an article and then get it out. There are ways to get it out online very easily, using social media to combat that. And then participate in beautiful things like Earth Day and conferences, and then inviting other clergy people to natural places. I had an opportunity to go to a lot of places, like speaking at the Vatican and other places, to be an influence maker, and in Asia as well. People
Warren,
are active. I'm going to show you the video now.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay. It's all in just the congregational grounds. Using the outdoors for farming and for gardening. Environmental teaching, indoors, outdoors, tree planting, taking the kids to the bay. Using the grounds for protest. Working with other co-believers in all faith traditions. Okay.
Sophia, you and I had a wonderful conversation as well, where we talked about a lot of things. But what I loved about that conversation was you shared in it how Green Muslims started, the group that you're part of. And in this discussion, we're trying to think like, what do we have? What roles do people of faith and religious institutions have in addressing mitigating climate change and the impacts of climate change that are coming? So I'm going to show the film based on our conversation, Sophia, and then panel, we're going to jump into this and really let's chat with each other about this. We're not looking for simple solutions because these are big problems, right? But like, what is the role of a faith community? So we'll share the video and then we'll chat.
Growing up Hispanic, Pakistani, American Muslim, the way my dad taught us Islam was to just care for people. It was never about what race, what religion you were, what sect of a religion you were. None of that matters to how I am, to how I was raised. In the US, being Muslim right now gives us an interesting perspective because we all come from different places. It's really easy to have a conversation about how we care for the environment because Allah made it. It doesn't matter where that is, whose it is, it's ours and we should protect it and want to protect it, not just for us, but for future generations as well. How do we develop in a way that's beneficial to the planet and to the people? And also immigration is a huge thing for me. So climate change is going to have climate refugees. We're already seeing it in Syria, in Bangladesh, in Pacific Island nations. Green Muslims started out of Ramadan with laftar, with not wasting food, with bringing over your leftovers when you're breaking fast with your friends, to bring your own cups and plates so you're thinking about your waste, not adding waste. Ramadan as a holy month is really introspective for a lot of Muslims, thinking about your religion, your faith, how you practice it, and having 30 days to really focus on it. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, fasted during Ramadan. A big principle of Islam is to follow the way he lived his life. We also do that to help yourself feel humility with how other people who don't have access to food feel, to humble yourself and know that that's how some people live. And thirdly, for your body, having a day without just eating whatever we eat, processed foods, snacks, energy drinks, helps cleanse your body, and so you feel better too. And at the end of the day, if you're lucky, being able to break your fast with your family, with your friends. With the pandemic, it's a little different. There might be more Zoom calls involved. During last Ramadan, I actually started kayaking, and so I'd be on the river, a little baggie of dates, and I would have my river date to help me feel more connected to nature and be able to really appreciate this planet that God has made for us.
And what I love about that, Sofia, is like you found a way, right, within the, your traditions to really give people a chance to connect with these. And that's what this question is about. There's lots of stuff that we can do, but within your own traditions, what do you have to offer at this time? Panel? Sofia?
Yeah, within the Islamic tradition, especially Ramadan starting next week, Wednesday, it's, like I said in the video, really introspective about how we practice our religion. And for me personally, that's how I'm respecting this planet that God made for all of us. And the action that we can take, it ranges from a million different things. One of the things I know I'm going to do some cleanups, I'm going to donate to organizations, mutual aid funds, but also take action. For me, taking action is really important. Living in Virginia, Dominion Energy is the largest lobbyist group in Virginia, basically controls our energy policies, and right now has been overcharging Virginians for a while and has a bunch of money that they're going to try to put back into their own pockets rather than reallocate back out to Virginians. And every state, every county, every city, every country is going to have actionable items like that. In DC, you can push for cleaner water in the Anacostia. I think they're always trying to build a natural gas pipeline everywhere. So there's lots of actionable items that we can do, and doing it in a way that makes you think of other people. So I don't live, there's a pipeline, MVP pipeline, that's going in Prince William and Fauquier County here in Virginia, kind of close to me, not directly close to me, but it matters. It's still people living there that are going to be exposed to it. There's still going to be methane gas released from natural gas pipelines that emit 30 times more, they're 30 times more dangerous than CO2. And so I think as a faith leader, it's really important to give those facts out there, and it's hard to not be a downer. I feel like a lot of times I'm talking to people and I'm just, the coral reefs are getting bleached and they're dying, biodiversity is going away, we're having wildfires and deforestation, sedimentation in our waterways. It's really bums me out in the most simplest terms. And it's a hard reality for people to face. And so as a faith leader, being able to explain that, talk about what action items can be done, and provide hope that we're going to be able to fight this and make it a better planet for everybody.
No, I just want to build on what you just said, Sofia, because action and hope are completely linked with each other. And so often we religious leaders have failed to see that. We have seen hope as linked with something off in the great by and by. But Greta Thunberg, I think, is the best educator on hope, no matter what religious perspective you may have. Hope, it's about engagement. And so to pick up on what you said about that pipeline, Sofia, one of the things I say in my book is I ask people the question, I ask the participants the same question. Most of you live within 5 miles of a pipeline. You probably live within 100 miles of a planned pipeline or a pipeline under construction today. Well, it turns out no one had ever really stopped a pipeline before 2011. And our goal then was to make Keystone a household word, which we succeeded in. Obama canceled it, Trump reinstated it, and Biden on his first day canceled it. We have, as a consequence of that recognition, hundreds of pipelines have been stopped. And in many cases, indigenous people and people of faith have been the leaders in stopping those pipelines. So one of the things I would suggest to people of faith watching this is find out about the nearest infrastructure, the nearest fossil fuel infrastructure that's being planned in and around you, and convince your congregation to go and have a worship celebration on that premise. And
I want to
help the community
something here,
try
though.
to understand what the heck you're up to. Go ahead.
I want to insert something here, though, because not everyone has the stomach for this kind of mitigation work. Not everyone feels called to doing protesting. And I hear with the climate movement, I hear a lot of faith leaders talking about climate mitigation and lowering carbon footprints. I'm not hearing a lot yet about adaptation and preparing for what we know is coming and what we have in our communities to do that. And I say that because I know that a lot of people are just not really can't do the kind of pipeline kind of work, and it's not their calling. And I wonder what else is there. Hari, do you have some thoughts? You come also from a public health background.
Yes. So yeah, I come from a public health background. I am an epidemiologist. So this is probably what I went to school preparing for, and also did not want to be prepared for this. Let me first of all say, Sofia, blessed fast when you start next week. So I wanted to wish that to you. What I really liked from Sofia's words is it's even sometimes the little things we do that can make such an impact. Because I don't think anyone in this entire forum doubts the ability that religion has to motivate people for action. And I will say, just because I feel like this is generally probably a left-leaning space, that most often the things that it motivates people to are not exactly the things that we align. However, nobody doubts that religion has the power to motivate people and feel really passionate about things. And I think the reason why it can do that is because every little ritual we do, every little action we do becomes sacred in religion, right? The consumption of the dates that you said when you were kayaking, the blowing of the horn that Rabbi Warren mentioned. These little rituals we do become so important to us. And from my own experience, my family, we're South Indian, we do rice flour designs in front of our home. And those rice flour grains actually go to feed the insects and the ants that come to our home. So I feel like one thing that we can do as religious leaders, if you are not prepared, if you're not equipped to be the one out there marching or doing legislation, what I go back to, our Sadhana, right? Let's at least instill these actions, these beliefs, these traditions in our children that say, hey, value the environment, value the world. And then that's how you empower an entire generation to do the work. Because again, I'll say it one last time, nobody here doubts the ability that religion has to change spaces and to motivate people.
Hari, I really like about how little things can make a big impact. I used to work at a landfill, and it really, my passion out of that was source reduction, which is so easy for people without having to protest, without having to be super actionable and on the front lines. It's buy less, throw away less. The easiest street to go down, if you don't need to buy it, don't buy it. When there's not demand, supply is going to go down. And you know that you're doing your part of creating less CO2 to make an item, less pollution to make it, to transport it, to buy it, just so it can sit in a landfill forever. And so, like our dharma, our will, God gave everybody will and intellect to be able to do what they're going to do. It doesn't have to be frontline protesting work. It can be as simple as buying a Brita when you get a chance, instead of keep on buying cases of water every week, or buy less cases of water if you really need them, depending on where you are.
Ari, you talked about a ritual. All of our rituals can have a natural component, I know for the Passover Seder, dipping greenery in water, the water of tears. But there's some political action we can do that's not really that political. And that comes out of the microfinancing movement. And for 12 years, we've created microfinancing projects in small places around the world that needed, for example, in Kenya, didn't have a water line. And we got a group of teenagers to raise funds. And, for between $1,000 and $3,000, you can create a project of a water line in a small village, or a library, or microfinancing projects. So we've worked with 22 countries now over the last 13 years, very small projects which deal with the problem of feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of the political issues. And which are very hard to accomplish. I mean, I led a delegation to the Congress for 25 years. They loved meeting people of faith, but they didn't do much. And, you need to be patient with that kind of large action. But the small, successful actions, small groups of people, every church, mosque, or temple can adopt a village somewhere in the world. We've done Guatemala, we've worked with Israeli and Palestinians, we've done many villages in Asia and other places. So there is a way to heal the world and feel like you're making some positive impact as well as a religious community without trying to convert anyone.
Welcome back, Terry. Thanks for joining us for this part of the conversation. I believe questions have been stockpiling.
They are coming in. We got a lot of questions. And actually, I wanted to say, one woman just said, can Jim talk about the Environmental Voter Project? And I just wanted to say, before we actually, if you could talk a little bit about that, but IREJN actually had Nathaniel Stinnett do a webinar for us. It's on our YouTube page. His presentation was fabulous. And so if you look at Interreligious Eco-Justice Network on YouTube, you can find his presentation. But Jim, can you just say a little bit about the Environmental Voter Project? And then I have another question.
First, watch the presentation.
One second, Jim. Before you do, panelists, we have 15 minutes to answer questions.
Okay.
And there are lots of questions. So the quicker your answer, the more questions we get to.
So watch the presentation. The Environmental Voter Project is in some ways the most surprising thing. People who care about the climate vote less on average than people who don't care about the climate. It's crazy. Nathaniel Stinnett and the Environmental Voter Project is out to change that. They had a huge impact on this last election. Every congregation can hand out pledge cards where people sign the pledge card and put it in the offering plate saying, I will make the environment a top priority in my voting choices. And by signing that card and then praying over it, that it becomes like almost certain that you're going to carry that through in your voting.
Yes. After this, I'll send out some links, and one of those I'll link to that particular presentation so you can watch it. It is fabulous. So I have a question from Kahinde. Says, how realistically can this interfaith interaction towards addressing the ecological crisis reach down to the grassroots? So far, it appears like something among those who are interested in the academic discourse on this subject. So basically, how do we get from this like very cerebral or, even just big thinking down to the grassroots?
Grassroots is where it starts. Sunrise Movement started from a grassroots organization, and now it's national with state chapters and local chapters. And I think that's one of the most successful examples of a grassroots movement. And so grab who you know and just get going. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, and just keep on widening out that net. And then you're there. You've started your grassroots movement.
You know, we have churches in the UCC all over the country that have affiliated with their local Sunrise chapter or their local Sierra Club chapter. And people say, well, wait a minute, they aren't religious. And what people are beginning to realize, talking about grassroots, is we are all in this together.
Start with yourself. Start at home. Start with your own awareness, your consciousness, saying, you know, what food do I choose to eat? You know, what do I choose not to buy or to buy? What do I choose not to consume? Just being aware of yourself, and then giving kids and children a lot of exposure to a passion for nature. Make that a part of their lives, and you know, teach them about it. Take them to beautiful places and teach them about other people. This is a generational problem. It's not just a pipeline. It's everyone's grandchildren are going to have to be dealing with these issues. So give them the courage and the power to be spiritually aware of caring for the earth and walking gently on the earth, like an 11th commandment. Walk gently on God's earth.
I guess the only thing I would add is, if you don't want it to be cerebral, be empathetic, listen, talk to people around you. You can be the person that's not cerebral.
And that's actually awesome, because we had another webinar, the first one actually with Harvard Seminary, that had Reverend Lennox Yearwood from Hip Hop Caucus and Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. And Dr. Hayhoe told this wonderful story in her presentation about a man who changed his whole town just by starting to have conversations about climate change. He brought climate justice to the attention of his entire town, just as one person talking about it. So I will send that link out as well. But I have another question. John would like to know, how do we have an energy system that's just both reliable, but also clean, renewable energy?
Well, Mark Z. Jacobson, his middle initial is Z, out at Stanford, has been scratching his head about this question for 20 years. And if you go to his website or read any of his papers, you'll realize that as of 2015, every state in America could have all of the energy that it needs powered by wind, water, and solar. And now his most recent research, just released, shows that 148 countries can now do that also. And that's because the price has fallen so rapidly of photovoltaic cells and also wind power.
And with this, you know, to help with this transition, there are bills being put out there to put a price on carbon, and some are more equitable than others. There are some that are very good that put money back into the hands of households so that they're not hammered by the raising cost of things. That kind of legislation is very powerful to push this even forward. So look out for those bills and talk to your members of Congress about supporting that kind of legislation.
I have another great question. How do we promote climate justice and transformational development as faith bodies?
You know, I think if you walk into a sanctuary of any kind, you know, having a banner, you know, having greenery, having a table, inviting people to get involved. You know, we do crazy things, like we'll invite teenagers to do hip hop rap on climate, to come up with the best rap, so they get engaged. You know, and go using the arts, using music, using anything you can think of, using plannings to get people engaged and involved. It's really connected to everything.
Only thing else that I would add is that climate injustice usually affects those that are the most vulnerable, and all religions have groups that do charity work. Get yourself out there, talk to people who are the most vulnerable, the homeless, the LGBTQ people, the immigrants, and I think that's how you really build a culture of environmental justice.
And have a sermon that pointing out what Hari just said, have a sermon that helps people realize that all of the things that our congregation cares about, that we usually treat in silos, that these things are all unified by the impact that climate change, the negative impact climate change is going to have on every single one of them.
And I think it's important for people to know that they don't have to drop what they're doing and then take on climate change as their thing. What they're doing actually is probably going to help. So for instance, if you want to reform the police and really, if you're part of the Black Lives Matter movement, well, if you're having a hard time in America on a nice day with the police, what happens when it's an extreme weather event and all hell breaks loose? Having these, protections for women with domestic violence, housing for people who are homeless. What happens with climate change is a threat multiplier. And so these threats get bigger. So therefore, if you're already involved in that work, you're already doing it. And as these threats enlarge, so should our hearts, our giving, and our support for these causes that are dear to your heart.
Well, that's actually a great segue for John's question, which is, some people in our community feel that the focus should be first and foremost structural racism and not climate change. Of course, these issues are interrelated, but with COVID disproportionately affecting people of color, how can a congregation work on both?
Be good to have a forum on climate racism. Invite people from everywhere to speak about it. Simple as that. And then to do something about it, like getting people together to go to an area and do some hands-on work, clean up that Anacostia River. Some of us actually went down and did that together.
Sophia, you were going to say something?
Yes, I think another good point is to focus on what you're good at. If you don't have enough information about environmental justice, reach out to somebody that does. Get that information into your congregation to educate everybody. You don't have to, don't reinvent the wheel. There are resources out there, and people are more than happy to reach out, especially now, especially in as such an accessible Zoom fashion, to be able to educate, to really connect these two issues and focus on what you can do best, and what your congregation feels is most important. There is no right or wrong answer. It doesn't, one isn't better than the other, one isn't worse than the other. It is both equally as important. All these issues matter, and focus on what you are able to do.
It's one thing that we haven't talked about is a genocide of species. They don't have a voice, but we're losing species rapidly. And we need to think about protecting oceans, protecting wilderness areas. I remember a story of a man in Indonesia who said the monkeys were attacking his village because we're cutting down all their trees. And they had no food, so along with racism is the genocide of species.
I get to talk to a lot of climate communicators all the time, like Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. And one of the things that they're really encouraging people to do who talk about climate change is to talk about the impacts of climate solutions. So to talk about what the world's going to be like when we do some of these things, when we decarbonize our economy, when we get off of fossil fuels, what's the world going to be like? And my husband's South African, and he was part of the anti-apartheid struggle. And he said that at the end of every ANC meeting that they had, that, it was grim, right? Things were really hard, but somebody's job was to stand up and say, this is what the new South Africa is going to look like. When we are successful, this is how our lives are going to be. And that's one of the powerful things that faith communities can do. They can give people a very clear picture of a better world, and help people to see this is what we're fighting for. It's so hard to talk about what we're fighting against, but to be able to be those visionary people, that is such a powerful role of people of faith and creative people.
Thanks, Peterson. I hope we can look back on this, our own day and age, and say that we could see what was coming and we did something about it. And we can feel proud that we did act when we could see what was coming, make it easier on future generations.
Yeah, I mean, one way to frame it, I just have to say this, one way to frame this is to say, oh my God, we get to be in this generation. Of all the generations that we could have been born into, it turns out we get to be alive when this difference is gonna happen. So let's roll up our sleeves in whatever gifts we have been given and contribute.
Wow. I love it.
I think we're about getting close to the end there, Terry. Anything else?
I know, I think so. I mean, are there any closing thoughts that our panelists want to share?
We have about 2 more minutes, I believe.
And I will say this, actually, this discussion on environmental and climate racism is also a perfect segue. Thank you for so many opportunities. Our next topic in our webinar series is going to be environmental and climate racism. So, and we'll be looking at it from both the Black Latinx experience, but also the Indigenous experience and what that looks like. So it'll be an in-depth conversation, and anyone attending tonight will surely get invited. So yeah, this has been a really great. I feel so inspired, and I loved hearing from all the different faith traditions. I learned information that I didn't know before. I'm so grateful to everyone for sharing. I feel very uplifted. I hope everyone else does. So, Peterson, does anyone have any closing thoughts or anything they want to share?
I have one quick thing to say.
Yeah.
In regards to the climate movement and how it's just all so heavy and so hard, that if you're doing your best is good enough. So if you're feeling stressed out, tired, overwhelmed, if you're doing your best, that's good enough. And if you're here to learn, I'm so glad that you're able to make it.
Pleasure to be with all of you, really. This is our...
And there are some beautiful words of appreciation coming up in the chat. I want to thank you all panelists. It's been really a joy. I'm just so honored to be with you because some of you have been doing this work for decades. Others are, just starting off. But please, folks, feel free to put in the chat, share your love for these panelists. They've taken a lot of time, and we even had a rehearsal in advance just so that we can get prepared. Thank you, panelists, and Warren, Sofia, Jim, Hari. Thank you so much for sharing your hearts and your minds.
Thank you.
Can I say on behalf of the panelists, I feel incredibly motivated to do more after tonight. So I think we've done something tonight.
Yeah, and I feel just so inspired and honored to be amongst these faces on this screen. Thank you.
Great group.
This is wonderful. And thank you. Yes, again, thank you on behalf of IREJN, and thank you to Susan and all the great folks at Hartford Seminary for their support and helping us put this together. It's just been so wonderful to have all of you sharing your thoughts and your inspiration, and I'm grateful.
Oh, I think someone actually asked if they could get our contact information. So I guess, can we give you our email addresses or
Sure.
something?
I have your, if you're comfortable, I'm happy to send that out, or if you want to send me your contact link, and I can include that when I contact the, registrants.
My email's good.
Okay. Okay, great. Wonderful.
Same.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to close things down. I just wanted to let you know. Thank you for coming, everyone. And thank you to all the panelists. Amazing job. Take care.
Have a great night.